So ESPN has completely disrespected Charlotte Flair, and she basically replied back, she's not happy. Oh boy. Sup y'all, welcome back to the review space, and this is kind of a funny story. So I'm just taking a look at this article on WrestlingInc.com, and apparently Charlotte Flair she gave a correction to ESPN, and rightfully so, because ESPN, the biggest sports network in the world, at least in the United States, North American market, they had a Sports Center graphic. And the Sports Center graphic, they're talking about promoting the Mania 35 main event. They're talking about it. It says right here, new WWE SmackDown Women's Champion Charlotte Flair took to Twitter on Wednesday to call out ESPN for a graphic that they used during Tuesday's Sports Center appearance to promote the Mania 35 main event. They used the graphics for Becky Lynch and the Raw Women's Champion Ronda Rousey that listed some of their WWE and UFC accomplishments. For Ronda Rousey, it stated that she is the first female inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, while Becky Lynch's graphic noted that she won the 2019 Women's Royal Rumble. But the graphic for Charlotte only just listed her as the daughter of WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair. And that's it. That's all they showed. That's all they mentioned. I can see why Charlotte had to reply back, and you can tell that she was just disappointed. I mean, if I was Charlotte, if I was in the same position, I would be pretty PO'd too. I would be pretty mad too, and I would just be a little bit kind of salty about this. Certainly if I was in Charlotte's position, you can totally sympathize, because this is what Charlotte said. So Charlotte wrote, when she replied back, I guess it might have been on Twitter, or on social media, she said, "Dear at ESPN, 7 times, now 8 times WWE Women's Champion would have been fine. If you need a more detailed list of my accolades, feel free to reference last year's Body issue or one of the many articles about me on your website. Sincerely, the daughter of WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair." Absolutely. Absolutely. And even from somebody named Glenn Rubenstein mentioned, I think that ESPN owes Miss Charlotte at WWE an apology for this. A 7-time women's champion outweighs who your father is, even if he is the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And a bunch of hashtags, Wrestling Inc., WrestleMania, etc. Completely embarrassing. Completely very disrespectful. That was like a total blatant disregard for Charlotte's freaking her accomplishments in WWE. I mean, all the things that she's done. I mean, keep in mind, this is Charlotte we're talking about. Yes, she's the daughter of arguably one of the greatest wrestling superstars ever. No doubt about it. Ric Flair is an absolute legend amongst legends. He is the Nature Boy. I don't even have to explain it. He's one of the best ever. But then, his daughter is also accomplishing a lot of big things. But for some reason, maybe, I don't know if it's just like a casual audience thing, or to the mainstream audience that are not particularly, they're not experts, or they don't follow wrestling, I should say. They're not big-time wrestling fans, and maybe they just kind of hear certain names. They'll attach a label to somebody. Oh, Ric Flair, the daughter of Ric Flair, I'm sorry, Charlotte. Charlotte Flair, the daughter of Ric Flair. Charlotte is the daughter. She's the young daughter, the youngest kid of Ric Flair. You know what I'm saying? And that's about it. That's all that people in the mainstream know about her. That's all people that's casual, or not even casual, just people that are not even wrestling fans. That's the label that's been attached to Charlotte, and that's the only thing that's the first thing, maybe not the only thing, but the first thing that they think of when they hear of Charlotte's name. They have to use, or not use, but they have to immediately attach the Ric Flair legacy, Ric Flair's accomplishments, Ric Flair's whole star power and his presence and all of that, his brand name is automatically attached to Charlotte. And I understand, I get it, but it's like they don't even know anything about her accomplishments. And it is very disrespectful, and it's like, this is ESPN. You would think that ESPN has at least one or two people that know about this stuff, right? They know certain things about wrestling, and they know the product. You know what I'm saying? Like, ESPN would have at least a couple of pro wrestling fans in there to kind of be able to talk about which superstar is which superstar has this, accomplishments, and they accomplished this, and they won this how many times the championship, different accomplishments like the Rumble, certain landmark achievements that's never really been done before. And Charlotte is one of the biggest stars they've had in the women's division by far. You can argue that arguably she's number one. She might be the biggest star that they've ever had on paper, in terms of giving her all these different title runs, putting her in different match types, and new match types that the women's never had before, whether it's ladder matches and steel cage matches, or H in the Cell matches. You know what I'm saying? So all these different cool match types and gimmicks, and going to Mania as one of the first ever females to main event Mania this year, and also just being at Mania, and being the woman to really defeat Asuka's streak and all that. Asuka was undefeated for about a couple of years, and then I believe it was Charlotte that ended up actually conquering that streak and ending that streak at Mania. So what I'm saying, like, Charlotte is one of the best of all time, no doubt about it, especially as somebody that is the daughter of Ric Flair. But you don't even need, it's just a shame that's become like her legacy. That's become the biggest thing that people think about her or know about her, especially that people that are probably not big time wrestling marks, not people that don't know nothing about wrestling. That's the first thing they think about. Oh, it's Ric Flair's daughter. Oh, it's Ric Flair's seed, Ric Flair's progeny, or whatever. Oh, she's related to Ric Flair. Oh, she's the daughter of Ric Flair. And that's about it. They don't know she's been multi-time champion between Raw and SmackDown. She's competed and had like a lot of firsts in WWE. First ever H in the Cell match, and all these different match types. It's like unheard of, at least in WWE, for the females and the women. Her classic matches against Sasha Banks and all of that. Her matches against Asuka, her matches against, even the segments with Ronda, and her segments against Becky, and the stuff that she did on NXT. She's had some classic moments, and even her character has actually kind of improved. Like, I've been pretty impressed with her heel work this particular year. Ever since she became kind of like at the beginning, she was like the third wheel between Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey. When she was added on, and she was kind of like the third wheel. She just kind of like the third person in that particular group, and it wasn't like she didn't feel important at the beginning. Like she's kind of shoehorned in, but then she kind of became this really charismatic, very likable, heel. Like she's really good at being a bad guy, really good at playing a villain. And I really dug Charlotte's work, this particular, her promos, her mannerisms. She's just very entertaining now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I love watching her. She's added a lot of personality to the relatively, kind of a one-dimensional feud between Becky and Ronda Rousey. She's kind of added a little bit more flavor to it. So, I'm digging Charlotte's work. It really is just sad. I mean, I don't know if it was intentional. I can't imagine that it would be. I don't think it was intentional that they wanted to put her down like that, or just kind of snub her accomplishments, or have it be a legitimate, intentional disrespectful thing, like an intentional diss. You know what I'm saying? Like throwing shade at her intentionally. I don't think it was meant to be derogatory, but it's like that's all you're giving her, is that she's just a daughter of Ric Flair. She's just a daughter. That's it. She's accomplished. You don't even know her accomplishments. That's not even an accomplishment. You just happen to be the daughter of somebody famous. You know what I'm saying? ESPN, they messed up. They messed up big time. And I understand why Charlotte was probably mad or probably just like, what the? Like, really? That's what you're going to write down? You know, like, are you kidding me? Right now, like, all the work that she's put in, all the good matches she's had, you know, that top position that she's been in, where she's like this tall, statuesque blonde, and she's got the good entrance, she's got the great attire and the robes, and yeah, she's like a female Ric Flair, kind of, but she's her own character. She's carved out her own legacy, you know, and for her to still be in that shadow of Ric Flair is pretty sad, and for like the mainstream to kind of the mainstream audiences to kind of see her, or not the mainstream audience, but the non-wrestling fan audiences to look at her as just the daughter of Ric Flair, and that's about it. It's an insult, it's an embarrassment, and it's like, man, they don't know nothing, you know. And I don't know if it's just because it's the modern, you know what I'm saying, era of WWE, just the 2010s, where wrestling's not that hot, so a lot of wrestling personalities like a Charlotte or a Becky, or, you know, some of the lesser known stars like maybe even like Alexa Bliss, or, you know, Paige, Ruby Riott, the lesser known, you know, mainstream, and not as known in the mainstream, they're just, nobody knows them. You know what I'm saying? Nobody knows anything about them. It's like nobody has any idea about them. They don't understand anything about them. They're just kind of names that some people might have heard. Like, oh, okay, that's Charlotte from WWE. Oh, okay, I vaguely know that she's, you know, I guess she's Ric Flair's daughter, because, you know, her name is Charlotte Flair, and that's about it. You know, that's all her accomplishment is. Like, that's all people know that aren't, like, wrestling fans. They don't know nothing about her. They've never seen her matches. They don't follow her work. They don't follow her segments. They don't watch, you know, WWE on a weekly basis, or just at all. So they have no familiarity with her work. And I think it's just a sign of a bigger picture. It's like a smaller part of a bigger picture that WWE isn't that hot, and WWE isn't that, like, relevant in the mainstream. You know what I'm saying? They lost so many ratings. I've talked about the drop in viewership. You know what I'm saying? They've dropped so much in ratings. Not as many people watch them and care about them as much. So even something like an ESPN, which is a big time mainstream top level, you know, sports network, they don't even know nothing much about Charlotte, aside from the fact that she's the daughter of Ric Flair, and they couldn't say anything else about her. Oh, she's a multi-time women's champion. She was one of the first ever, you know, different types of match stipulations. She's had classic matches. You know, she's one of the 4 horsewomen. And it's like, man. I think it just means that there's not that many big relevant stars in WWE that people know anything about. Like, yeah, they've heard of Ronda Rousey. She was a big star in UFC and then crossed over to WWE. So people know a little bit about her. Becky Lynch, maybe not so much because she's, you know, the man and all that. But it's like, okay, she's kind of like a female Stone Cold type, kind of, but for the PG era, and she won the Women's Royal Rumble this year. And then you have Charlotte, and then it's like, what do you know about Charlotte? Well, she's the daughter of Ric Flair, I guess, because her name is Charlotte Flair. And it's like, nobody knows. You know what I'm saying? People don't know nothing about these stars, these people. You know, like, much less the other females, like I mentioned. Somebody like a Ruby Riott, nobody knows nothing about her. You know, Sarah Logan, or I'm trying to think of the other, you know, Lacey Evans and Lana. It's like nobody knows anything about them. You know, Asuka. Who's Asuka? Oh, well, she's a female Japanese wrestler in WWE, and, like, that's about it. Like, nobody knows nothing about any of these characters. Because, you know, WWE's not that relevant. So I think it is, to a certain degree, it's just, they're not like super mainstream. WWE is not that relevant anymore, and they're just not, they don't have compelling TV as they used to. They're not as interesting as they used to. Compared to, like, the late 90s Attitude Era, early 2000s, they don't have as many compelling characters. And even somebody like a Charlotte, who should be a pretty big deal in this modern generation, most people don't know nothing about her because WWE isn't that hot. So it's like people aren't tuning in. They don't see her accomplishments. They don't see her matches. And it's just like a cycle. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, WWE is a thing, and they get aired on primetime TV and all that, and they get, at least, maybe over 1 million or a couple of million people watching every single week. But it's not like the Attitude Era where you have like 5 million, 6 million, maybe up to 10 million, and maybe even more so around the world back in that late 90s where like The Rock became a household name. And people knew his catchphrases, people knew his accomplishments, people knew his mannerisms, his look and all that. Same with Stone Cold Steve Austin. And even with WCW, guys like Goldberg, people knew the character, people knew his accomplishments. His feuds with Hogan and the NWO and all that. And his streak, his long running streak, one of the biggest streaks in wrestling back in the day. Certainly way bigger and way more important than Asuka. And it's like no disrespect to Asuka, but Goldberg's undefeated streak was way more relevant back in the late 90s. In that, 90, 97, 98, period. He was hot, man. Goldberg was like red hot. He was up there with Austin. You know what I'm saying? So, those guys were... Wrestling back then was getting way more viewership. More people knew about the characters. And I think, again, it goes to show you that not as many people care about wrestling now. So it's like, why should we care about Charlotte? Why should we care about what her character is or what she's accomplished? So, it's just, it's the lack... It's WWE's lack of appeal, WWE's lack of ability to put over their top stars and make relevant, like really interesting, compelling characters that people care about and people want to watch, unfortunately. So, anyway, I just wanted to give my thoughts on that. It is kind of a funny story, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. Charlotte deserves way more recognition, but I can see why, pretty much because WWE's not that relevant anymore in the mainstream. So that's it. Subscribe to the channel. That's it for this episode of Review Space. Click on the bell button for the latest notifications. The bell button on the latest notifications. Click on the bell button for the latest notifications. And until next time, peace.